He just wanted a cup of tea. That was all. A 32-year-old single father sitting alone at a corner table in a border tavern, trying to hold on to 5 quiet minutes before the world started pulling at him again. Then a stranger in silk decided to humiliate the waitress in front of everyone. What that stranger didn't know, what nobody in the tavern knew, was the kind of man Cade had been before he became a carpenter, and what his hands could still do in under 2 seconds. The morning had the kind of light that Cade used to miss when he was somewhere else. Thin gold, the kind that came through the tavern's east-facing windows and made the scarred oak tables look like they were worth keeping. He sat at a small round table near the edge of the room, the corner where the wall met the window, with an open view of the door and 2 exits within 6 steps. A low railing he could step over if he needed to reach the alley. He didn't think about it anymore. His body had made the decision for him, the way his body had been making decisions for him since he was 19 years old, and learning the kind of things nobody should have to learn. That young. Cade was a carpenter. He built things, door frames, roof beams, furniture, the particular honest work that a man could do with his hands and see the result of at the end of the day. He ran a 2-man operation with his cousin Teo, doing renovations on old buildings in the border settlement. The work paid enough, not well, enough, to keep the rent on the small house he shared with Ellie, his 7-year-old daughter, enough for her school supplies and her boots, and the particular, non-negotiable expense of a cat-shaped lunchbox that she had chosen herself and that he packed every morning with a sandwich cut diagonally because she had opinions about the geometry of bread. Ellie was 7. Ellie was the whole thing. Ellie was the reason he had moved back to this town 2 years ago, the reason he wore soft boots instead of the combat leather he used to wear, the reason he kept his hands busy with wood instead of with the things they had been trained for. Ellie didn't know about any of that. Ellie knew that her father made pancakes shaped like cats on Saturday mornings, and that he could braid hair almost as well as her friend Luna's mother. That was enough. His wife had died 4 years ago, the wasting illness, the slow kind, the kind that gave you time to prepare and then proved, when the end came, that no amount of preparation was sufficient. He had held her hand through the last night. She had told him, near the end, with the particular lucid clarity that the dying sometimes produced, "Don't be alone forever, Cade. That's all I ask." He had not forgotten. He took a sip of his tea. It had gone from hot to warm while he wasn't paying attention. Across the tavern, the morning was assembling itself, the cook banging pots in the kitchen, the serving woman moving between tables with the particular efficient grace of someone who had done this 1,000 times. The serving woman, he noticed her the way he noticed most things, automatically, without intent. She was Orc, tall, green-skinned, with the broad shoulders and strong jaw that Orc women carried naturally. Her hair was pulled back in a practical knot. She wore the rough-spun tunic of tavern staff, stained at the apron, the clothing of a person who was working rather than presenting. But something about her didn't fit. The way she held herself, the posture, the precision of her movements, the particular, almost military economy of motion that suggested training rather than habit. She moved between tables like a person who was observing rather than serving, cataloging faces and conversations with an attention that went beyond the professional requirements of her position. Her name, according to the other staff, was Lissa. She had been at the tavern for 3 weeks. She was new to the settlement. Nobody knew where she had come from, and she didn't volunteer the information. Cade noticed. He didn't pursue. He had learned a long time ago that people's stories were their own business. He took another sip of tea. The morning tried to hold itself together. It didn't get the chance. The man came in loud. That was the first thing about him. Everything was loud. His voice, his laugh, the particular aggressive confidence of a person who occupied space the way a fire occupied a room, by consuming it. If you're already on the edge of your seat, if you can feel what's about to happen the way Cade could feel it, drop a like and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Every like, every comment pushes this story further, and trust me, you want to be here for what happens in the next 60 seconds. He was somewhere in his 40s, built thick through the shoulders, wearing silk that fit him the way expensive clothing fit a man who was used to paying people to tell him he looked good. Gold rings on 3 fingers. 2 men flanked him, hired guards, Armed, the kind of men who relied on intimidation rather than skill. His name, Cade would learn later, was Harwick, a merchant, the kind who traded in volume and leverage, who had made his fortune buying properties in border settlements and squeezing the residents until the margins satisfied him. Harwick walked past Cade's table without seeing it. His elbow caught Cade's cup. The cup didn't fall. Cade's hand was already there, catching it. But tea sloshed over the rim and onto his wrist. Harwick glanced down with the mildly irritated expression of a man who had stepped in something on the street. "Watch where you put your things, Carpenter." Cade set the cup down. He wiped his wrist with a cloth. He said nothing. Harwick looked at him for another second, waiting for something. When it didn't come, he made a small noise in his throat and walked on, 3 tables down, and sat with his guards flanking him. Cade finished wiping his wrist. He folded the cloth neatly. He took another sip of tea. It was cold now. He didn't mind. A minute passed, then another. Harwick ordered food. He told Lissa he wanted the eggs cooked properly, not the way you people keep trying to serve them. Lissa took the order without expression. Professional, contained, the face of a woman who was managing something behind the neutrality. Then Harwick reached out and caught her wrist as she turned. The grip was not gentle. His fingers dug into the green skin above her hand, the particular, deliberate pressure of a man who was making a point rather than making contact. Lissa's face changed. A flash of something that she suppressed immediately, the way a person suppresses a reflex when suppression is the only safe option. "I know what you are," Harwick said. His voice was loud enough for the room to hear. Not shouting, projecting, the volume of a man who wanted an audience. "You think that apron hides it. An orc woman serving drinks in a human tavern. What's the matter? Your clan throw you out." Lissa didn't answer. Her jaw tightened. Her free hand closed into a fist at her side, not in preparation for a strike, but in the particular restrained way that a person's body responded when the body wanted to act, and the mind was overriding the body. "Sir, please let go," she said. Her voice was steady but strained. The strain was not weakness. It was control. The control of a person who could have responded differently and was choosing not to. "Oh, she speaks," Harwick laughed, pulling her closer. "Tell me, orc girl, does your chief know you're here playing dress-up with the humans?" The tavern had gone quiet. The particular uncomfortable silence that descended when a room full of people recognized that something wrong was happening and was collectively deciding not to be the one who addressed it. A man at the bar suddenly found his drink fascinating. An older couple near the window began gathering their things. The cook in the kitchen turned away. Cade watched Harwick's fingers dig into Lissa's wrist. He saw the marks forming on her green skin, the particular reddening impression that force left on orc flesh, darker than on human skin, more visible. He set his tea down. The cup made a small sound against the wood. He stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, the way he used to move when approaching a checkpoint, non-threatening, but impossible to ignore. His boots made soft sounds on the wooden floor as he crossed the 4 yards between his table and Harwick's. "I think the lady asked you to let go," Cade said. His voice was calm, conversational, but there was something underneath it that made Harwick's guards shift in their seats. Harwick looked up at him. He took in the worn clothes, the calloused hands, the sawdust still visible on his sleeve. "This doesn't concern you, Carpenter. Go back to your little table and your little tea." "See, that's where you're wrong," Cade replied. His eyes never left Harwick's hand on Lissa's wrist. When a man puts his hands on a woman who doesn't want it, it becomes everyone's business. "Now, I'm going to ask you once. Let her go." Harwick's face flushed. "Do you know who I am? I own half the buildings in this settlement. I could buy your workshop, your house, and your daughter's school with what I carry in my purse." "I know exactly what you are," Cade said, and now there was an edge to his voice, quiet and precise. "You're a man who thinks gold makes him untouchable, but right now, your gold doesn't mean anything. You're going to let go. You're going to apologize. And then you're going to leave." Harwick made 2 mistakes. The first was assuming that a man who worked with wood and wore old boots was weak. The second was nodding to his guard. The guard, the larger one, on the left, started to stand, reaching for Cade's shoulder. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Later, the cook would try to describe it to the evening staff, and he would find that he couldn't, because it happened too fast and too cleanly to break into pieces. He would say, he wasn't there, and then he was there, and the guard was on the ground. What Cade did was this. He stepped inside the guard's reach, which meant the man's hand went past his shoulder instead of onto it. He caught the guard's wrist in his left hand, the hand with the old scar that ran from the base of his thumb to his wrist, and rotated it. Not hard, just enough, in the direction the joint didn't want to go. With his right hand, he took the guard's elbow and he pushed down and forward in a short, smooth arc. The guard's own momentum did the rest. He went down, one knee, then both, then forward onto the wooden floor. Cade went down with him, one knee lightly on the guard's back, the arm folded behind in a position that was not painful unless the man tried to move. The second guard had barely started to stand when Cade's free hand pointed at him. A simple gesture that somehow carried enough weight to freeze him in place. Nobody in the tavern moved. A chair scraped somewhere, a spoon clinked against a bowl. Somebody's breathing was audible, harsh, ragged, the breathing of a room full of people who had just watched something they didn't fully understand. "Nobody needs to get hurt," Cade said, his voice never rising above conversational level. "Your friend is fine. His shoulder might be sore tomorrow, but nothing's damaged." He looked at Harwick. "Let her go. Now." Harwick released Alyssa's wrist. His face was a mixture of rage and something else. The particular animal recognition that occurred when a man who had never been physically challenged encountered someone who was not afraid of him. Lyssa stepped back. She rubbed the red marks on her skin. Her expression had changed, not to gratitude, not to relief, to attention. Pure, focused, undivided attention, as though she had been half asleep all morning and had just now woken up. She was looking at Cade the way a person looked at something they recognized. Cade held the control hold for another 3 seconds. Then he released the guard, who scrambled to his feet, clutching his shoulder. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Carpenter," Harwick snarled. "I'll have the trade guild shut your operation down by morning." Cade returned to his table. He sat down. He picked up his cold tea. "Everyone here saw you grab her first," he said. "That's assault. What I did was intervene. Any Nobechi worth his badge knows the difference." The Nobechi came 12 minutes later. The tavern owner gave his statement. Lyssa gave hers. 2 customers confirmed that Harwick had grabbed her first. Harwick left with his guards, straightening his silk, muttering about connections and consequences. The tavern slowly exhaled. Conversations resumed. Low, excited. The particular energy of a room that had witnessed something and was processing the witnessing. The old serving woman, Paulette, who had known Cade since he moved to the settlement, brought him a fresh cup of tea without asking. She set it on his table. She said, "On the house, honey." She patted his arm once and walked away. Cade sat there. He was surprised to find that his hands were shaking. Not much, a fine, small tremor in the fingers. He pressed them flat against the wood of the table until the tremor slowed. It didn't stop. A shadow fell across the table. He looked up. Lyssa was standing there. She had not left with the Nubati. She had not gone to the kitchen. She was standing beside his table, looking at his hands on the wood. "Give me your wrist," she said quietly. He didn't move. "Your hands are shaking," she said. "You're breathing too fast. I know what that is." She reached down and took his wrist, gently, the opposite of how Harwick had taken hers. She pressed her thumb against the pulse point on the inside of his forearm. 4 counts in, she said. Hold 4. 4 counts out. From the chest, not the throat. Cade looked at her. The instruction was familiar. Not generally familiar. Not the way a common breathing exercise might be familiar. Specifically familiar. The exact technique, in the exact sequence, with the exact pressure point on the forearm, that orc warriors used to manage combat stress. He had learned it 12 years ago, in a camp on the northern border, from an orc commander who had taught a 19-year-old human how to keep his hands steady after his first engagement. I know this technique, he said. Something moved across Lissa's face. Quick, controlled, immediately suppressed. But he saw it. Surprise of a waitress hearing that a carpenter knew orc breathing methods. The surprise of a person whose professional assessment had just been confirmed. Where did you learn it? She asked. Old training. A long time ago. She held his wrist for another 10 seconds. His pulse slowed. His breathing deepened. The tremor in his hands diminished. Not gone, but manageable. The technique worked the way it always had. The way the orc commander had promised it would. Not by eliminating the response, but by giving the body a structured path through it. Lissa released his wrist. She straightened. She looked at him for a long moment with an expression he could not read. Then she reached into her apron pocket and set something on the table beside his tea. A small object, bone, carved the size of a coin. An orc token. He recognized it, a debt marker. In orc culture, it meant, I owe you. The debt is acknowledged. It will be repaid. My name is Lissa, she said. You know where to find me. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen. Her stride was different now. Not the stride of a serving woman. Something else. Something that matched the breathing technique in the debt token and the particular assessing way she had looked at his hands. Cade sat at his corner table and looked at the bone token and thought about the orc warrior breathing technique that a tavern waitress should not have known. He finished his tea. He put the token in his jacket pocket, the inside pocket, over his chest. He paid Paulette. He tipped her generously. He walked to his workshop. His hands had stopped shaking. The guard recognized him. Cade hadn't expected that. He had spent 12 years burying the man he used to be under layers of sawdust and quiet living, and he had done it well enough that nobody in the settlement knew anything about his past, except that he had been in the border service, and that he didn't talk about it. But the guard, the large one, the one Cade had put on the floor, had looked up at him during the hold with an expression that was not pain and not anger, but recognition. The particular shocked recognition of a person encountering someone from a previous life in an impossible context. He had said it quietly, so only Cade could hear. North Pass, 3rd Unit. Your commander was Thyra. Cade had gone cold. Not outwardly, his body didn't show it, but inside, the name hit like a fist to the sternum. Thyra. The orc commander who had taken a 19-year-old human recruit and turned him into something that could survive the northern border. The woman who had taught him to breathe under fire and fight without striking, and move through terrain that would kill an untrained person in an hour. Get up, Cade had said quietly. Go. Don't do this again. The guard had risen, clutching his shoulder, but as he walked toward the door, he had glanced back, not at Cade, at Lissa. A glance that lasted half a second and that carried the particular weighted quality of a man who had just put two things together. Cade saw the glance. He filed it away. He didn't know what it meant yet. The story spread the way stories spread in border settlements, not through newspapers or town criers, but through the particular efficient network of people who talked to each other over fences and across market stalls, and in the specific, low-voiced conversations that happened when something worth discussing had occurred. By the following morning, the version circulating through the settlement was this. The carpenter at the corner table had taken down a professional guard in 2 seconds, using orc combat technique, without throwing a single punch. The carpenter had moved like water. The carpenter had orc training. The carpenter was not what he appeared to be. The version was accurate enough that Cade found it uncomfortable. At the workshop, Teo was waiting. Teo was 26, 4 years younger than Cade, 6 inches shorter, and built like a fence post. Compact, solid, the kind of body that was useful for carrying lumber and fitting into tight spaces. He was Cade's cousin, his sole employee, and the closest thing Cade had to a confidant, which was a word Cade would never have used, but which described the situation accurately. Primo, Teo said, sitting on a lumber stack, chewing a strip of dried meat. You're famous. What? Everyone's talking about it. The merchant, the guard, the tavern girl. 3 people asked me about it on the walk here. Mrs. Aldrin stopped me and asked if you were some kind of retired soldier. What did you tell her? I told her you were a carpenter who was good with his hands. She didn't believe me. Cade picked up his tool belt. He buckled it on. He selected a chisel from the rack. Teo. Yeah? It's over. It happened. I don't want to talk about it. Okay, Primo. But one question. No, one question. Cade looked at him. Where did you learn that? Teo asked. His voice was different. Not teasing, not light. Genuine, because I've worked beside you for a year and a half. I've seen you lift beams and cut joints and do the kind of careful, patient work that carpenters do. And what people are describing from that tavern is not a carpenter. Cade was quiet for a moment. He ran his thumb along the chisel's edge, not testing it, thinking. Before I was a carpenter, he said, I was in the border service. 8 years, I was assigned to an orc unit on the northern front. I trained with them. I fought with them. Teo stared at him. You trained with orcs? Orc Close Combat Division. My commander was an orc woman named Thyra. She taught me how to fight without striking, how to breathe under pressure, how to move in the dark. And you never mentioned this? It wasn't relevant. Primo, you put a professional guard on the floor in 2 seconds. That seems relevant. Teo. Okay. Teo raised his hands. Not my business. Let's go build things. They went to work. At school, the story arrived before the afternoon bell. Ellie came out of the building at the end of the day and ran to Cade, the way she always ran. Full speed, backpack bouncing, the particular unrestrained velocity of a child who had not yet learned to approach people at anything less than maximum. He caught her. He lifted her. She was getting too big for this, but he did it anyway because one day he wouldn't be able to. Daddy, she said, settling on his hip. Lucas said you're dangerous. Cade set her down. He looked at her face, the small, serious face of a 7-year-old who was processing information that she hadn't requested and didn't know what to do with. Kruthos was indefinitely so indefinitely, and the arrow found it still far from the back. Where was the go down there near them? He was being right, Cetera being right. What else did Lucas say? He said you beat up a man in the tavern. He said his sister's friend saw it. Cade knelt. Eye level. The way he always communicated the important things, face to face, no height advantage, equal ground. Ellie, I need to tell you what happened. Not what Lucas heard, what actually happened. Okay. A man at the tavern grabbed a woman who didn't want to be grabbed. I asked him to stop. He didn't. His guard tried to push me, and I stopped the guard. I didn't hit anyone. I just held him until the Nobetchi came. Ellie looked at him. The brown eyes, her mother's eyes, were steady. Are you dangerous, Daddy? He thought about how to answer that. He thought about the 12 years between his 19th birthday and this moment, and about the things that those years contained that he would never tell a 7-year-old. I know how to protect people, he said carefully. I learned it a long time ago. I'm not dangerous to anyone who doesn't need to be protected from. Is that different from dangerous? Yes, sweetheart, it is. She considered this. Then she picked up her backpack and said, Lucas said it was cool. He said you were like a warrior. I said warriors aren't real, but he said it was cool. Did you believe him? I believed the cool part. The attack came 3 nights later. Cade heard them before they reached the house, not through any supernatural ability, but through the particular, persistent alertness that 8 years of border service had wired into his nervous system, and that 2 years of peaceful carpentry had not entirely unwired. He was lying in bed, not sleeping, listening to the sounds of the house, the old radiator ticking the wind against the shutters, Ellie's breathing through her open door, when a sound arrived that didn't belong. Footsteps. 3 sets, moving through the yard with the careful, deliberate tread of men who were trying to be quiet, and who were not quite quiet enough. Cade's body responded before his mind caught up. He was out of bed and on his feet in the dark, his breathing already shifting into the 4-count pattern that Thyra had drilled into him until it was as automatic as blinking. He moved to Ellie's door. She was asleep. Her stuffed rabbit was tucked under her chin. The moonlight through her window laid a stripe of silver across the floor. He lifted her. She stirred but didn't wake, the particular heavy sleep of a child who felt safe. He carried her to the storage room at the back of the house, the room with the bolt on the inside and the narrow window that opened onto the neighbor's yard. He set her on the floor, wrapped in her blanket. He locked the bolt. Then he went downstairs. He did not light a lamp. He did not take a weapon. He moved through his own house in the dark, the way he had once moved through terrain, by feel, by memory, by the particular embodied knowledge of a space that his body had mapped independently of his eyes. The back door was being tested, a hand on the latch, gentle, probing. Not a kick, not a break-in. A professional entry. Cade positioned himself behind the door frame. He waited. The waiting was not passive. It was loaded. The particular, compressed stillness of a body that had gathered all of its energy into a single point. The door opened, a figure stepped in. Large, armed, a short blade visible in the faint moonlight. Cade took him the way Thyra had taught him to take a man in a doorway. From behind the frame, controlling the weapon hand first, rotating the wrist to disarm, then the elbow lock that put the man on his knees. 3 seconds. No sound except the man's involuntary grunt as his knees hit the floor. The second came through the kitchen window. Cade heard the scrape of the shutter and was already there, waiting in the dark beside the window frame, letting the man climb through into a space that the man thought was empty and that contained a person who had been trained for exactly this. The man's feet touched the floor. 2 seconds later, his face touched it too. The third was at the front. Cade heard him hesitate. The particular meaningful silence of a person who had expected to hear activity from inside and was hearing nothing and was recalculating. The front door opened slowly. The man entered with his blade leading the stance of a person who knew that something had gone wrong and was proceeding anyway because proceeding was less frightening than admitting what the silence meant. Cade took him in the hallway. 1 step, 1 hold. The man went down. 3 men, less than 2 minutes. No lamps lit. No alarm raised. Cade stood in his dark hallway with 3 men on the floor and his daughter sleeping in the locked storage room upstairs, and he breathed. 4 counts in, hold 4. 4 counts out. He searched them. No insignia, hired men, border toughs, the kind who worked for coin and asked no questions. On the belt of the first man, a small leather pouch containing 10 gold pieces. The payment, Harwick's signature style, gold up front, instructions delivered through intermediaries. Cade dragged them to the yard. He sat them against the fence. 3 men, disarmed, bound with their own belts, blinking in the moonlight. He crouched in front of them. He spoke in Orcish. The words came easily. The language he had spoken for 8 years, the language that felt more natural to him in moments of violence than common tongue. Because Orcish was the language in which he had learned violence, and the language in which he had learned to control it. In the Orc warrior code, he said, a man who attacks in the night and is defeated is released, not killed, not imprisoned, released. Because the shame of being defeated is punishment enough. The defeated man carries the shame home, and the shame teaches. He looked at each of them. I'm releasing you. Go back to whoever sent you. Tell him what happened. Tell him that the next time he sends men to the house where my daughter sleeps, the Orc tradition will not apply. Do you understand? They understood. The understanding was visible in their faces, the particular, recalibrated fear of men who had expected a carpenter and had found something else. He cut their bindings. They left quickly, without looking back, the way men left when they had been given a mercy they had not expected and did not want to test. Cade went inside. He locked the doors. He went upstairs. He opened the storage room. Ellie was still asleep, curled in her blanket, the rabbit under her chin, her breathing steady. He sat on the floor beside her. He leaned against the wall. He stayed there until morning. The next day, he modified the house. Not dramatically, not the kind of modification that a neighbor would notice, but systematically. The kind of modification that a man with military training performed when the perimeter of his life had been breached. Every room got an exit route. The kitchen window, a rope tied to the frame, long enough to reach the ground. Ellie's bedroom window, another rope, shorter, coiled under the sill. The storage room, already the safe room, got a tin can alarm on the door. 3 cans, strung on wire, positioned so that any movement of the door would produce a sound loud enough to wake a sleeping child. The meeting point. Mrs. Aldrin's house, 3 doors down. Mrs. Aldrin was a retired school teacher who had lived in the settlement for 40 years and who had a solid door and a sensible disposition, and who had already agreed, when Cade asked her, without explaining why, to take Ellie in at any hour of the night without questions. He taught Ellie the system, not as emergency training. He couldn't frame it that way without terrifying her, as a game. This is a game, okay? If you hear the cans make noise at night, you grab the rope, go out the window, and run to Mrs. Aldrin's. You knock 3 times fast, she'll open the door. Ellie looked at him. The brown eyes were steady. This isn't a game, is it, Daddy? He held her gaze. 7 years old, and she already knew the difference between the things adults said and the things adults meant. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's instinct for the truth. No, sweetheart, it's not a game, but you can do it. I know, she said. 3 knocks, 3 knocks. She hugged him, suddenly, tightly, the fierce hug of a child who understood that something was wrong and who was choosing to be brave about it, the way she had seen her father be brave about things. He hugged her back. He held on a second longer than he usually did. Then he went to work, because not going to work would have been worse than going. And because Teo was waiting at the workshop, and the old house on the North Road needed new window frames, and the world required him to keep building things, even when parts of his life were threatening to come apart. The guild complaint arrived 4 days after the night attack. A formal notice sealed with the Border Trade Guild stamp, delivered by a messenger who refused to make eye contact with Cade when he handed it over. The complaint alleged unlawful assault on a merchant's employee, disruption of commercial activity, reputational damage to a guild member in good standing. The remedy demanded a public hearing, or, alternatively, and this was the part that made Cade set the document down and stare at the wall for a full minute, a formal challenge. Orc law permitted it. On the border, where Orc and human legal systems overlapped, a man accused of dishonoring another could demand satisfaction through trial by challenge, a supervised, weaponless combat in the public square. The tradition existed because the Orc legal system valued physical truth-telling in a way that human courts did not. The body, the Orcs believed, could not lie the way the mouth could. A man who was in the right would fight like a man in the right. The body would show what the words concealed. Harwick had chosen the challenge, not because he intended to fight himself. Harwick had not thrown a punch in his life and had no intention of starting. Orc law permitted the hiring of a champion, and Harwick's champion, according to the guild notice, was a professional, an Orc mercenary named Grath, who fought challenge bouts for coin across 3 territories and who had not lost in 14 contests. Cade could not refuse. Under border law, refusal was admission of guilt. The guild would revoke his trade license. He would lose the workshop, the contracts, the ability to earn a living in the settlement. He sat at his kitchen table with the document in front of him and thought about Ellie, who was asleep upstairs, and about the house he had modified against night attacks, and about the bone token in his jacket pocket that an Orc waitress had given him for a debt she had not yet repaid. He thought, I don't want this. He thought, I don't have a choice. The night before the challenge, someone came for him on the street. He was walking home from the workshop, late, past dark, the settlement's lamps casting uneven circles on the cobblestones. He heard the footstep, a half-second before the blade arrived. He turned. The knife caught his left arm, not deep, not fatal, but enough. The steel sliced through his sleeve and into the muscle of his forearm, and the pain was immediate and hot and informative. The kind of pain that told you exactly how much tissue had been opened and how much blood was coming. The attacker was fast, not professional fast, but desperate fast, the speed of a man who had been given one instruction and was committed to completing it. He lunged again. Cade stepped offline, the particular angular movement that Orc combat training emphasized, moving off the line of attack rather than backward, creating an angle that the attacker's momentum couldn't follow. The man stumbled past. Cade caught his knife wrist, rotated, and put him on the ground with the same technique he had used in the tavern. Different night, different attacker. Same result. The man hit the cobblestones. The knife clattered away. Cade's knee was on his back, the arm locked, the hold applied with the automatic precision of a body that knew this sequence the way it knew walking. "Harwick?" Cade asked. The man said nothing. He didn't need to. The answer was in his belt pouch, another set of gold coins, Harwick's signature payment method. Cade released him. The man ran. Cade picked up the knife, examined it for identifying marks, found none, and dropped it in the gutter. He walked home, pressing his right hand against the cut on his left arm. The blood was warm between his fingers. It was not a dangerous wound. The blade had been short, the cut shallow enough. But it was a wound, and tomorrow he was supposed to fight. Lissa found him at the tavern an hour later. He had gone there because the tavern was still open, and because Paulette kept a medical kit behind the bar, and because going home with a bleeding arm would have meant explaining to Ellie why her father was injured, and he was not ready to have that conversation at 10 o'clock at night. Paulette had cleaned the wound and bandaged it, clicking her tongue and saying things under her breath about merchants and cowards. Cade sat at his corner table, the same position, and stared at the white bandage on his left forearm. Lissa sat down across from him. She had changed out of her serving clothes, wearing a dark tunic, her hair loose. Up close in the low lamplight, she looked different without the apron. Harder, more angular, the particular cut-glass quality that orc faces produced when the softening effects of service industry neutrality were removed. She looked at the bandage. "Show me. Show me." He unwrapped the bandage. The cut was 4 inches long, running along the outside of his forearm, not deep enough to reach tendon, but deep enough to affect grip strength, deep enough to matter tomorrow. Lissa examined it with the particular clinical attention of a person who had seen wounds before, not the way a waitress saw wounds, but the way a commander saw wounds. Evaluating function, not severity. "You can't fight tomorrow," she said. "I have to. Refusal is guilt. Your grip on this hand is compromised. The challenger is a professional. He'll target the injured arm. I know. Then withdraw. Let the guild hearing proceed instead. The guild hearing is Harwick's territory. He owns half the guild members. The hearing would bury me." Lissa looked at him. Her amber eyes were unreadable in the lamplight. "You're going to fight a professional orc mercenary with a wounded arm because you have no other option." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she stood, went to the kitchen, and returned with materials. Not the tavern's medical kit, but something else. A small leather pouch she carried in her own bag, containing orc medicinal supplies, herbs, a fine bone needle, thread made from sinew. She stitched the wound. Her hands were steady, the particular practiced steadiness of someone who had performed field medicine before. She applied an orc herb poultice that smelled like pine and iron, and that burned briefly and intensely before numbing the area. "This will reduce swelling by morning," she said. "The stitches will hold through the fight if you don't take a direct hit on the wound. If he targets the arm, and he will, block with the right." "Thank you." She looked at him. The expression on her face was the expression she had worn after the tavern fight, the pure, focused attention of a person who was assessing something important. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You could leave, take your daughter, move to another settlement, start over." "I don't run," Cade said. "Not anymore." "Why not?" He thought about the question. He thought about Ellie, and the house, and the workshop, and the particular painstaking life he had constructed out of the wreckage of a military career and a dead wife and a 7-year-old daughter who deserved stability. "Because my daughter is watching," he said. "And if I run, she learns that running is what you do when someone threatens you. I'd rather she learn that you stand." Lissa was very still. Then she nodded once, a single sharp nod that was not casual agreement, but something deeper. The nod of a person recognizing something they valued. She packed her medical supplies. She stood. "Tomorrow," she said, "at the square, I'll be there." The market square was full by mid-morning. Challenge bouts drew crowds the way they always did. The particular uncomfortable entertainment of watching two people test each other physically in a context that was technically legal and technically civilized and was, beneath the rules and the supervision, as primal as anything the border produced. Cade arrived alone. Teo had wanted to come, but Cade had told him to stay at the workshop. If this goes wrong, he had said, Ellie needs someone who can finish the Henderson job and pay the rent. Teo had not argued. He had clasped Cade's forearm, the uninjured one, in the border grip, and he had said, Primo, come back. The square was marked with a chalk circle, 20 feet in diameter, the traditional boundary. A guild official stood at the edge with a bell and a set of rules that he read in a bored, nasal voice. No weapons, no strikes to the throat or eyes. The bout ended when one combatant was held for a count of 10 or yielded. Harwick was in the crowd, front row, silked and gold, flanked by new guards. His expression was the expression of a man watching an entertainment he had purchased and was confident of the outcome. Groth stepped into the circle. He was large, orc large, broad through the chest and shoulders, with the particular, dense musculature of a man who had spent years training his body for exactly this. His face was scarred. His hands were enormous. He looked at Cade with the flat, professional assessment of a fighter evaluating his opponent. Cade stepped into the circle. He was smaller, human small by orc standards, lean, carrying the wound under his sleeve and the night of the attack in his body's memory. His hands were a carpenter's hands, calloused, precise, trained for a different kind of work than this. The guild official rang the bell. Gruth moved first. He was fast for his size, the speed of a trained fighter, not the desperate lunge of an amateur. He closed the distance in 2 strides, reaching for Cade's shoulders with both hands, the standard orc grappling entry that used size and weight to overwhelm. Cade did not meet the grapple. He stepped offline, left, away from the reaching hands, creating the angle that Thyra had taught him a lifetime ago. Not backward, sideways, into the space that the attacker's momentum couldn't follow. Gruth adjusted. He was professional. The adjustment was fast, the recovery clean. He turned, reset, came again. This time lower, reaching for Cade's legs, the takedown that used the orc's lower center of gravity as an advantage. Cade sprawled, dropping his hips, spreading his weight, the defensive technique that prevented the takedown by making the body too flat and too heavy to lift. Gruth's hands found his legs but couldn't grip. Cade's right hand came over Gruth's back and found the base of his skull. Not striking, pressing, the specific pressure point that Thyra had called the compliance point. The spot where the neck met the skull, where sustained pressure created disorientation without damage. Gruth staggered. Not much. He was too well trained for a full stagger. But enough. The fraction of a second that a trained fighter needed to exploit the opening. Cade moved, the same technique from the Tavern, the wrist capture, the rotation, the elbow control, but adapted for a larger opponent. He didn't try to put Grath on his knees. He went under, beneath Grath's center of gravity, using the orc's own height against him, threading his arm through the gap between Grath's elbow and his body, and locking the hold from an angle that the larger man couldn't counter without dislocating his own shoulder. 30 seconds. Gruth went to one knee, then both. Cade's arm was locked around the orc's elbow, and the hold was complete, not painful unless Grath moved. Agonizing if he did. The guild official began counting. At 7, Gruth slapped the ground with his free hand. The tap, the yield, Cade released him immediately. He stepped back. His left arm was on fire. The wound had torn slightly under the bandage, and blood was seeping through the cloth. But the arm had held. The stitches had held. The crowd was silent. Not the stunned silence of the Tavern. The heavier silence of a large group of people processing something they had not expected. Harwick, in the front row, was pale. Gruth stood. He rubbed his shoulder. He looked at Cade, not with anger, not with humiliation, with the particular professional respect that fighters showed each other when the fight had been clean. 3rd unit, Grath said quietly. North Pass. Cade looked at him. I fought against your unit, Grath said. Other side. 4th year of the border war. Your commander was Thyra. Yeah. She taught you well. She did. Gruth extended his forearm. The orc warrior salute. Forearm to forearm. The grip of equals. Cade took it. They held for 1 second. Then Grath turned and walked out of the circle, and the crowd parted for him, and the challenge was over. Then The tavern door opened. Lissa stepped out, but it was not the Lissa the settlement knew, not the waitress in the stained apron, not the quiet orc woman who served drinks and took orders and moved between tables with the invisible efficiency of service staff. She was wearing armor, full orc ceremonial armor, the dark iron chest plate, the shoulder guards stamped with clan insignia, the heavy belt with the chief's seal hanging from it in polished bronze. Her hair was pulled back in the warrior's knot. Her posture was different, no longer the contained service industry neutrality of a woman managing her visibility. Straight, open, the posture of command. The tavern staff standing in the doorway behind her were staring. Paulette's mouth was open. The cook had stopped mid-step. A serving girl was holding a plate that she had forgotten to set down. The crowd in the market square went still, not quiet. Still. The particular complete cessation of movement that occurred when a group of people recognized simultaneously that the reality they had been operating under had just been replaced by a different one. Lissa walked to the center of the square. She walked past Cade without looking at him. She walked to where Harwick was standing, pale now, his gold rings catching the light, his guards shifting uncertainly behind him. She stopped in front of him. The chief's seal on her belt was at his eye level. "My name," she said, and her voice carried across the square with the particular resonant authority that orc voices produced when they were not suppressing anything, "is Lissa of the Ironmaw clan. I am the chief of the Northern Territory. I have been working in this tavern for 3 weeks because I wanted to see how the border lives. What I saw was a merchant who grabs women, threatens carpenters, and sends knives in the night." She looked at him. The amber eyes were not the eyes of a waitress. They were the eyes of a woman who commanded a territory and who had been choosing for 3 weeks to set the command aside, and who was now picking it back up. "You touched my wrist, merchant. In orc law, that is assault on a clan leader. The penalty is severe." Harwick's mouth opened. No sound came out. "But I am not going to invoke the penalty," Lissa continued, "because the man behind me," she gestured toward Cade without turning, "asked you to stop, and you didn't. He fought your champion, wounded, and he won. He has earned the right to determine your consequence." She paused. "However, there is a separate matter. Orc Warrior Code states, a man who insults a warrior in public kneels before that warrior in public. You called him carpenter and woodworker as though those words were insults. They are not, but you use them as weapons, and the code applies." She looked at Harwick with the particular level gaze of a person delivering a sentence that had been determined before the words were spoken. "Kneel." Harwick looked around the square. The faces looking back at him offered no rescue. The guild official was silent. The crowd was silent. His guards were silent. "Kneel, merchant, or I invoke the penalty for assaulting a clan chief, and the penalty is significantly less comfortable than a sore knee." Harwick knelt in the market square, in front of the settlement, in front of the guards he had hired and the guild he had leveraged, and the people he had threatened, and the carpenter he had called little. The merchant in silk went down on both knees on the cobblestones. Lissa let him stay there for 10 seconds. Not more. Cruelty was not the point. The point was the image, and the image was complete. A man who had believed that gold made him untouchable, kneeling on stone in front of a woman he had grabbed and a man he had underestimated. "Get up," Lissa said. "Leave this settlement. Your trade license in the Northern Territory is revoked. If you return, the welcome will be different." Harwick stood. He did not speak. He did not look at anyone. He walked to his horse, mounted, and rode out of the market square with his guards behind him. And the sound of the hooves on the cobblestones was the only sound in the entire settlement. Until they were gone. Lissa turned. She looked at Cade. He was standing at the edge of the chalk circle, blood seeping through his bandage, sweat on his face, his breathing steady. "Your arm," she said. "It held. It's bleeding." "I know." She walked to him. She took his forearm, the wounded one, and examined it through the bandage with the same clinical attention she had shown the night before. The crowd watched. The crowd did not know what to do with what it was watching. A clan chief in full armor, holding a carpenter's wounded arm in the middle of a market square. "Come to the tavern," Lissa said. I'll restitch this. You're the chief of the Ironmaw clan, Cade said, and you need stitches, one thing at a time.